Three boats left the Mississippi coast on the 4th of July. Three boats reached a barrier island 11 miles out into the Gulf, an island with no roads, no houses, no cell towers, and no permanent residents. Three boats came back, and one young man didn't. 19-year-old Nolan Wells went to Horn Island to celebrate Independence Day with people his own age. Within hours, one of those boats was taking on water and screaming into a radio for help. Within days, Nolan's body had been recovered. And within 1 hour of that recovery, according to his family's attorneys, investigators had already publicly signaled they saw no evidence of foul play. But here's the part nobody can explain. Two separate autopsies have now been performed on Nolan Wells. The first one, the one his own family paid for, came back with a cause of death of undetermined. Not drowning, not accident, undetermined. And it noted a discoloration on his skull that the family's pathologist reportedly could not definitively explain. The second autopsy, the official one, is finished. And it is sealed. Nobody outside a grand jury room is allowed to read it. So today, we're going to walk through this case the way an investigator would, hour by hour, document by document, and we're going to separate what is actually known from what the internet has decided. Because those two things, they're not the same story. First, you need to understand where this happened because the location isn't a detail. The location is the entire case. Horn Island sits roughly 11 miles off the Mississippi coast in the Gulf. It's part of a protected national seashore. It is almost entirely undeveloped. Sand, scrub pine, marsh, and mosquitoes. There are no lifeguards, no convenience stores, no streetlights, and critically, there is no reliable cell service. That matters because it means there is no digital breadcrumb trail, no pings, no selfies with timestamps every 10 minutes, no security cameras. On a mainland case, investigators can reconstruct a night almost minute by minute from phone data. On Horn Island, they can't, which means this case rests almost entirely on one of the least reliable forms of evidence in existence, human memory, and specifically, the memory of a group of teenagers and young adults who, by multiple accounts, had been drinking in the sun for hours. On July 4th, a group traveled out to the island in 3 separate boats. Nolan Wells was among them. What they went out there to do was exactly what you'd expect on the 4th of July: swim, hang out, celebrate. And for most of that day, there is nothing unusual to report. The unusual part starts on the way home. At some point after leaving the island, one of the 3 boats began taking on water. A distress call went out. Emergency dispatch audio from that call later leaked online, and this is where this case detonated. Because in the background of that recording, behind the panic and the wind and the engine noise, thousands of people online became convinced they could hear something. A name and a phrase. I'm not going to tell you what people think they hear, and I'm not going to prime you before you listen, because that's exactly how audio pareidolia works. When someone tells you what to hear in a garbled recording, your brain will hear it. Every time. This is a documented phenomenon, and it has wrecked more than one criminal investigation. What I will tell you is this. Multiple outlets that have examined the timeline have reported that Nolan Wells was not on the boat that made that distress call. Reporting indicates that boat left Horn Island and went into distress a few minutes later. And according to ABC News, authorities have said they've spoken with 2 witnesses who place Nolan Wells still on the island as late as 6 o'clock in the evening, while after that boat had already departed. Those same accounts indicate he had been drinking heavily. Now, I want to be extremely careful here because this is the exact point where most channels get sloppy. That timeline does not prove nothing criminal happened. It does not close the case. It does not mean Nolan wasn't failed by someone. What it does appear to do is separate 2 events that the internet welded together within 48 hours, the sinking boat and Nolan's disappearance. For weeks, millions of people online treated the distress call as the smoking gun. If the reported timeline holds, those may simply be 2 different moments in a very bad day. And there's a second problem with that audio, one that got almost no attention. Some of the earliest visual evidence that circulated, photos and video allegedly showing who was and wasn't on that boat, came to the public not from investigators, but through social media commentators. Which raises a question almost nobody asked before sharing it 10 million times. Where's the metadata? Every photo and video your phone takes carries embedded data, the date, the time, often the GPS coordinates. It is the difference between this is evidence and this is a picture. When material in a death investigation gets released by a third party rather than authorities, the first question should always be, can the file itself confirm when and where it was captured? That's not paranoia. That's basic verification. And in this case, it's a question the public deserves a straight answer to from whoever is circulating material on any side. But the strangest part of this case isn't the audio. It's what came back from the medical examiner. Here's something that almost never happens. Nolan Wells' family did not wait for the state's autopsy. They arranged their own, a private, independent autopsy, and it was completed before the official one. Think about what that says. That is a family that, from day one, did not trust that they would be told the truth. The result of that private autopsy, as described publicly by attorney Ben Crump, cause of death, undetermined. Now, let's be precise about what that word means, because people misread it constantly. Undetermined does not mean murder. It also does not mean accident. In forensic pathology, undetermined is what a medical examiner writes when the physical evidence available does not allow them to reach a conclusion with reasonable certainty. It's an honest answer. It's just not a satisfying one. And then there's the detail that has kept this case alive online for weeks. According to the family's side, the private examination noted a discoloration on the skull. Here's why that's genuinely difficult. A discoloration on the skull can be consistent with blunt force trauma and impact, something that happened to him. But it can also be consistent with post-mortem lividity, blood pooling in the body after death, which is a completely normal process and can produce discoloration that mimics bruising to the naked eye. Where a body rests and for how long and in what conditions all affect this. And this is the brutal reality of the case. A body recovered from warm Gulf water after a period of time presents an extremely difficult examination. Decomposition destroys the very details a pathologist needs to distinguish injury from artifact. So the family's pathologist reportedly did not rule out foul play. But, and this is the sentence that gets left out of almost every viral post, that same examination also did not establish foul play. Both of those things are true at the same time. And people on both sides of this case have been picking whichever half fits the story they already believe. Then the state's official autopsy came back. And here's where it gets genuinely frustrating for everyone watching this. You are not allowed to read it. The official findings have been sealed. Not leaked, not summarized, not released, sealed. And the reason given is that the district attorney has already announced this case is going before a grand jury, which is either the most reassuring development in this entire case or the most suspicious one, depending on who you ask. So, let's actually explain what a grand jury is. Because I promise you, 90% of the takes you've read online about this case were written by people who don't know. Here is the single most important thing to understand about this investigation. Up to this point, a sheriff's investigator could walk up to any witness in this case, knock on the door, and ask to talk. And that witness could legally say, no. That's not a loophole. That's the Constitution. In America, you do not have to talk to police. You can decline, you can lawyer up, you can walk away. And if a group of young people were advised by attorneys not to give statements, which, frankly, is what most defense attorneys in the country would advise regardless of guilt or innocence, then an investigation can hit a complete wall. A grand jury demolishes that wall. A grand jury can 1. Issue subpoenas. Witnesses can be legally compelled to appear. Refusing isn't an option, it's contempt. 2. Put witnesses under oath. Now, it's not a friendly chat. Lying carries perjury exposure. 3. Compel records. Phone records. Text messages. Location data. Financial records. Now, prosecutors can already get some of this through other legal channels, but a grand jury subpoena is faster, broader, and goes straight to the source. 4. Indict. If the evidence supports it. There's also a distinction that matters enormously here, and almost nobody is talking about it. There's a difference between an investigative grand jury and an indicting grand jury. An investigative grand jury is a fact-finding tool. Its job is to gather, compel testimony, pull records, build a complete picture. An indicting grand jury is the next step, where a prosecutor says, based on all of this, we're asking you to charge someone. A case can start as the first and convert into the second. Or, and this is the part people do not want to hear, it can conclude with a finding that a young man died in a tragic accident on a remote island after a day of heavy drinking and that no crime occurred. That is a real possible outcome. It has to be said out loud because a lot of channels covering this case have quietly removed it from the table. And an investigation that can only reach one conclusion isn't an investigation. But there's a mirror image to that, and it's just as important. The fact that the sheriff's office reportedly signaled no evidence of foul play within roughly an hour of recovering the body is, at minimum, a process failure. You cannot meaningfully assess foul play in an hour. You don't have an autopsy in an hour. You don't have toxicology in an hour. Toxicology alone takes weeks. Whatever the ultimate truth is, that early statement is the reason this family doesn't trust the system. It's the reason they ordered their own autopsy. It's the reason a national civil rights attorney is now involved. You don't get to rush to a conclusion in hour 1 and then be shocked that the public won't accept your conclusion in month 3. And now we have to talk about what this case has become outside the courtroom, because it may end up being the most consequential part of the whole story. Within days of Nolan's death, internet sleuths had identified the young people on those boats. Then their parents' jobs, addresses, and social media. What followed was not investigation. It was a siege. Families connected to this case have reported receiving thousands of threats, including death threats. A man in the Sacramento area has been arrested in connection with threats made in this case. The FBI has reportedly been reviewing others. And I want to be blunt with you about something, because I think you deserve honesty from a channel you watch. Content like this video is part of that ecosystem. Every true crime channel covering this case, including this one, is making choices. We can cover the facts and the process, or we can cover the speculation and the targets. One of those gets more views in the short term. The other one doesn't get somebody's mother swatted. So here's my line, and I'm going to hold it. I will not name private individuals who have not been charged with a crime. I will not host their photos. And if you post their information in my comments, it gets deleted and you get blocked. Not because I'm protecting anyone, because a contaminated jury pool is the single most effective way to make sure nobody is ever held accountable for anything. Prosecutors lose cases over pretrial publicity. Convictions get overturned over it. If there is something here, the mob is the biggest threat to ever proving it. There's also now a defamation angle. Reporting indicates at least one father connected to the group has spoken publicly about the possibility of pursuing a defamation claim over public statements, suggesting the young men may have been involved. Separately, a family member has publicly offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction of anyone who contributed to Nolan Wells' death. Read that again. A member of a family that the internet spent months accusing is offering $50,000 to help find out who's responsible. That is not a simple story. And anyone selling you a simple story about this case is selling you something. So let's strip out every rumor, every hot take, and every viral thread. Here is what is genuinely, legitimately unresolved. 1. Why is the cause of death undetermined? And will the sealed state autopsy say the same thing, or something different? 2. What is the skull discoloration, trauma, or post-mortem lividity? Has an independent forensic pathologist reviewed the actual imaging, not a description of it? 3. If witnesses place Nolan on the island at 6 p.m., who is still there with him? And when did the last boat leave? 4. Who was responsible for the head count? On a trip 11 miles offshore, how does a group return without confirming that everyone came back? 5. When was Nolan first reported missing, and by whom? The gap between last seen and reported is one of the most telling numbers in any case like this. 6. Why did the sheriff's office signal a conclusion within an hour of recovery? 7. Has all circulating photo and video evidence been authenticated by metadata, regardless of who released it? Notice something about that list. Not one of those questions requires you to accuse a single teenager of murder. Every single one of them is answerable with documents, records, and forensics. That's what a grand jury is for. Here's where I land. The district attorney needs to move quickly and then be completely, uncomfortably transparent about what was found. Not because social media is demanding it. Never because social media is demanding it. A prosecutor who bends to a trending hashtag produces garbage cases and freed defendants. But because the alternative is worse. If this file stays sealed and this case quietly dies, nobody will accept it. Not the family. Not the public. And frankly, not the families who have spent months under siege and who deserve to be cleared on the record, not just left alone. A 19-year-old went to a beach on the 4th of July and never came home. His mother deserves an answer. And so does everyone else standing in the wreckage of this thing. Now I want your take, and I want the specific one, not the general one. Of those 7 unanswered questions, which one do you think cracks this case open? Number 3. Who is still on that island at 6 o'clock? Or number 5. The gap between last seen and reported missing? Drop the number in the comments and tell me why. I read them, and if enough of you land on the same one, that's the follow-up video. And one more time, because it matters, do not name, tag, or contact anyone connected to this case. Post the question, not the person. I'm going to keep tracking the grand jury. The moment that file unseals, or the moment we learn it won't, that video goes up the same day. Subscribe and hit the bell so you actually see it because YouTube will not show it to you otherwise. Thanks for watching. Be careful what you're certain about.